Welcome to We Are Everyone, a video and podcast series powered by Pivotal Moments, and we focus on the intersection of mental wellness in the workforce. We bring together young professionals and mindful executive mentors to bridge the generational gap and bring to the surface conversations about the importance of mental wellness and how to overcome career tradition challenges. Mental wellness is paramount. Join us. Welcome to We Are Everyone. I'm your host, Jen Sherman, and this is the first episode of season 4. So it's exciting times here at Pivotal Moments. I would like to welcome our guests on the first episode of season 4. It's going to be a great conversation. We have Meredith Goldberg-Morse. She is the Senior Manager of Social Impact at Viacom CBS. And then we also have a fellow Penn Stater, David Rusenko. He is the former founder of Weebly and now is the GM of e-commerce at Square Inc. So welcome to you both. How are you doing today?
I'm great.
Doing great.
Good to be here.
Awesome. Yeah.
Good to have you. It's a rainy day here in Washington, D.C. Hopefully it's nicer weather out where you guys are.
Sadly, no. Equally dreary here in Brooklyn.
Well, I think on the West Coast, David might be enjoying some sunshine.
We have blue skies. This is the nice time of year for us out here in the Bay Area.
Love it. Well, I like to always start the show with a statistic around mental health. So in a report released by the American Psychiatric Association entitled Stress in America Gen Z in October 2019, Gen Z were more likely to have received treatment or gone to therapy, 37% compared to millennials, 35%. Gen Xers, 26%, baby boomers, 22%, and the silent generation, 15%. I think as we are entering, I guess, finally the new normal. And we have seen that taking away the curtain, that mental health is a whole other pandemic, and younger generations have felt more comfortable in talking about it than older generations. So, I just wanted to kind of first start off with that statistic, and we can kind of get to, I think, the aspect of some background on yourselves will also play into to our first topic. But, I would love to start with you, David, on, we've been talking about a term at Pivotal Moments called mental fitness and being aware of the importance of mental strength. What do you think of the term mental fitness when you hear that, David?
Yeah, it's really funny. It was actually, it reminds me of something that my wife told me kind of a number of years ago. Her analogy, which I always really liked, is that we all go exercise, we go to the gym, we go for runs, bike rides, like all this stuff we do multiple times a week to keep our bodies fit and in shape. But what are we doing for our mental health? And, we should be doing just as much, to keep ourselves in shape, kind of in terms of mental health, emotionally, and kind of working on that angle as well. And there really shouldn't be any stigma. Like there's no stigma for going to the gym to try to be healthy, right? It's really the same thing.
I agree. How about you, Meredith? What do you think?
Well, David, we are clearly very much on the same wavelength because for me, the phrase mental fitness really just reinforces that concept that mental health is health. And the same way we take care of our physical health, we need to take care of our mental health in the same way, the way that we take preventative measures to make sure that our bodies are feeling good. And the same way we go to a doctor if something is wrong and actually needs care. It's really important to have that same mindset when it comes to our mental well-being. And I think that phrase mental fitness really reinforces that.
Completely agree. And I like mental fitness because it does, to your point, incorporate the physical, mental. I mean, I could say my Peloton is a form of my meditation, right? But like, you have to be in that mindset. Like there's so many times before that I wasn't in tune with myself working out. And it was more so just like a task off of, my to-do list versus really being in tune with your body during that movement. So, I really, love that term. And, speaking of around mental health, wellness, and fitness, both of you are in that media world, right? I mean, the media world, and also have, being at Square, being, in the startup world, David, being at the folds of the growth of media and how that affects our mental health. So I would like to understand, from both of your perspectives, how do you think the media and social media are impacting mental health, wellness, and fitness? And then what is the technological impact as well on mental fitness? Whoever wants to start.
Sure, I can start on the technology side, and then I think that well, I mean, I think there's lots of ways that technology obviously impacts mental health and fitness. I think anywhere from some of the tricky issues we'd really deal with at Weebly in terms of hosting content really revolved around things like cyberbullying and and even where to draw the line on when to take down a website when it there's cyberbullying for teens and younger children, and that's something we always drew a really, really sharp line on in terms of just not allowing on the platform. And then there's other content that's it's much more of a gray line in terms of what constitutes bullying, what is kind of where do you draw that line, especially as it deals with adults. But clearly people go online. We've known this sort of anonymous effect brings out the worst in people sometimes. And so there's always interactions there. I think these days too, thinking about social media. I was having a conversation with a parent of high school age kids who was telling me that they all look on Snapchat and they see there's this real time view of where all your friends are. And so if you're not invited to that party, right away, right? I was like, oh God, I don't want that with my friends. Like, can you imagine? Like looking and seeing all your friends at a party and you're not invited, and that's just awful. And so I think there really needs to be a role. I think as technology is built and developed, to just understand like what are we doing to people? Like how is this actually being interpreted and internalized, especially when we're talking about sort of high schoolers, middle schoolers. That stuff can be brutal.
Completely agree with that.
Yeah, I can safely say that I feel very grateful to have gotten at least through high school without having Snapchat and Instagram and all of those kind of pressures of social media. But what I will say is that on the flip side of that, one of the huge positive impacts that both social media and entertainment media have had over the past decade plus is that they have opened up conversations about mental health in a tremendous way. I think both through research and just anecdotally, we've seen that people are much more comfortable speaking openly about their mental health because they've seen those conversations modeled on those platforms. So the stigma has definitely decreased. But one of the things that I'm personally most optimistic about when it comes to both entertainment media and to a certain extent social media is that hopefully we're going to see a shift in that conversation from just speaking about mental health openly and raising awareness to actually really digging into what the actions are that we need to take, whether it's as individuals or at a community or society level, to actually support mental health and well-being. So that's something I'm cautiously optimistic about, I would say.
I love that idea. I mean, can you imagine if Snapchat Weekly polled you and said, how are you feeling? Right. And then actually use that data to inform their product decisions in terms of how they built their products to make sure that they were positively impacting, the emotional health of people. That would be pretty game changing.
Yeah, I think we're in this kind of transition, not even transition. I mean, and to echo your point, Meredith, I'm happy that Instagram came to float when I was in college. And it's funny, I look back at those, I deleted those pictures because it's embarrassing what my phone looked like back then with the blurriness. But, I think already, feeling left out of things. And to David's point, like, I agree with that aspect, but I think it's taking it to, the next level is like, okay, like, how can we leverage this for the good? Because it's not going anywhere and it's only going to advance more. So framing those conversations around like getting that data, like how are people feeling? Maybe with AI at some point, we can, our devices can understand how we're feeling. So they don't serve us, types of ads or types of content or pictures even that like would bring us down. So I'm curious to see what happens there with technology. But we're seeing this growing demand to address mental health. We're the venture capital world is seeing a very high rise in investing in mental health companies. I'm curious, how is addressing mental health and wellness guiding your work? Do you think that is the younger generation driving this push to open up discussions around mental wellness? And Meredith, how does this demand impact the decision to run social impact campaigns around mental health, including the Mental Health Storytelling Coalition?
Yeah, I think that demand is definitely guiding the work, particularly as it relates to what young people are really thinking and feeling about this issue. Because research does show pretty clearly that Gen Z is more open about mental health than previous generations, and they're also more vocal about the systemic challenges that surround our experiences with mental health care. And in some cases, they're taking matters into their own hands to close that gap. But overall, there is still a gap between people acknowledging that experiencing a mental health challenge is not something that should be judged or stigmatized, but not necessarily understanding how to take action when it comes to their own mental health, particularly among communities of color, because there's historically been a lack of culturally competent care available, which is a huge, huge issue. And entertainment media really has tremendous power to close that gap, whether it's making viewers more comfortable speaking up if they're struggling themselves and they need help, or demystifying what treatment actually looks like and showing that even though, unfortunately, in our current system, it's not always easy to find treatment, that it is, worth that persistence to find the right therapist or the right kind of care, or even modeling how to help a friend who's struggling. So that's actually why MTV's effort specifically focuses not only on expanding mental health representation in our own content, but also modeling some of those positive behaviors and joining forces with the entertainment industry so that viewers are seeing these messages in a really entertaining and integrated and seamless way across a really wide range of content. So different genres, different platforms, different formats, so much that those messages around mental health and mental health care become really ubiquitous and they're not as rare or outside of the norm.
Yeah, I definitely found that interesting. And, for you, David, do you see this demand impacting the businesses that, Square is working with, or even within Square itself?
Yeah, I mean, sort of in this dimension, there's several things really. I mean, Square's tools aren't now, we're not working on as much consumer or kind of individual facing tools, but I think the big areas here that are focused for us, as it relates to our sellers, and obviously last year was very challenging, very, very challenging for a lot of small businesses, businesses of all shapes and sizes, really. And then really also as it relates to, our internal employee population and especially as we're navigating this new normal of what does it mean, it's been entirely work from home for a lot of the employee base over the last year. That brings with it new challenges around work-life balance, and you're not going to the office anymore. Now work comes to you a lot more readily for in a lot of cases, but also as you open back up and and people do start returning to the office, what are the implications of that as well, and how do we make sure that there's Square has announced that people can kind of choose flexibility in their work sort of indefinitely, and so how some real challenges in terms of how we make sure we provide a level playing field for people who do decide to come to the office or do decide to work from home. And so I think there's sort of a lot that we're working through just to make sure that from that workload and work-life balance and work style perspective, that we can really continue to provide a pretty level playing field and something that's long-term sustainable in terms of working for people in their system and their schedule.
Yeah, I find that interesting too with the whole, future episodes, or we're also going to bring on like the mental health, like a certified mental health professional and someone like, either yourself, Meredith, or you, David, just to talk about like, none of us are trained chief people officers. None of us are trained to know how to really communicate about this type of stuff in the workplace. Before, I feel like when we went to the workplace, we turned into a robot. We talked about, how good the coffee is, what should we get for lunch? Not like I am completely freaking out up here because of all this anxiety or whatever. And I think now it's like, what does that new communication look like? And two, David, to your point as well, is while you have the internal, but part of the Square platform, which I use for my invoices, is small businesses and businesses in general, finances are stressful. We're launching Senses and Cents around finances because that was stressful. I was waiting in for Square to transfer into my bank account. That's something too from a outward facing perspective. And I don't know if you've done any campaigns around that, around like mental wellness, mental fitness, and finances.
Yeah, totally. And I think there's a lot that can be done. I mean, one of the things that kind of comes to mind as you're talking about that is just we launched this integration with Cash App and with the payroll, so that as you basically get as you work and accrue hours, like you could get paid that evening, right? Like every single day you could have that cash available to you as opposed to waiting. So I think there's a lot of ways to even reimagine like that 2-week payroll cycle where you get paid, by the way, after the 2 weeks, not ahead of time, right? And and for a lot of people that's really stressful because your expenses don't wait, and so are there ways for us to kind of reimagine what that looks like so that so it's really more fair, equitable, and kind of bringing more more economic empowerment to people.
Yeah, and Meredith, this is a good opportunity, kind of segmenting into the next topic of different mental health campaigns or initiatives. And I know, you had the mental health guide for the media that, MTV was a part of. And I would love for you to kind of touch on that and, the kind of the research and background on that. And then kind of like, as I believe that was rolled out in April, and kind of what results you've seen since then.
Yeah, so that mental health media guide and the mental health storytelling coalition that came together to actually produce the guide and hopefully make it a widely used resource across the industry was really born out of this idea that we need more mental health storytelling in entertainment media, and we need more positive mental health storytelling in entertainment media. So not only the work that many media and entertainment companies and content creators are already doing to ensure that content doesn't have a negative impact, particularly when you're dealing with more serious subject matter like suicide or substance abuse, but actually harnessing the power of storytelling to proactively create a positive impact, and understanding how content creators can infuse messages around healthy coping and resilience and self-care and treatment and peer support into content in a way that is really organic and entertaining, but also inspires viewers to shift their mindset or their behavior or take some sort of action to support themselves or someone else. And that comprehensive guide or set of recommendations did not previously exist. So what we've done with this mental health storytelling coalition is actually bring together the leading mental health experts and nonprofits in the space with the leading entertainment and media companies to take all of the knowledge and insights and research that those experts and organizations have at their disposal and translate them into really actionable tips that content creators can implement right now into content they're developing, whether it is unscripted or reality television, whether it is scripted or comedy or a podcast, really no matter the format or genre. So the intention there was really to translate all of the amazing research that exists and all of the amazing knowledge that exists about what people can actually do to support their mental health and support others, and help content creators make those things actionable. So we're really excited. It just launched in May. So we're just at a point where we're starting to understand what the results of that will look like. But we are very excited to see some of the storylines that emerge using the mental health media guide and the impact that those storylines have on viewers across the full industry.
Yeah, and Meredith, just to touch on that point, I think it's interesting because now we have like the creators, and the creators are much larger than, where we saw it was really based in Hollywood or, New York City where, there was, but now, we're creators right now, right? I mean, we have a microphone, we have a platform, but also understanding like it can kind of, trickled down to, the TikTokers. There's so many people that we need to educate. So I always say, like, the more the merrier, and also, pairing that with the verified mental health experts and research. I mean, that is really pivotal, as well, because, now we have so many mental health experts that say they're mental health experts, and we have to be able to kind of sift through a lot of that, in order to get, the best advice and recommendations.
Yeah, one of my favorite aspects of the media guide actually is that it has within it an expert directory. So if there is a content creator who is using the guide as a resource but wants to go deeper and really bring an expert advisor into that process and through that storytelling journey with them, which is, of course, something that is only going to increase the impact of a project, there's a list of vetted experts and organizations who can play that role, who might have expertise in a particular topic or theme or scenario or community that's being depicted in a piece of content. So it really helps content creators understand who can serve as that credible resource or advisor throughout the process.
Yeah. And which I love too. And David, kind of going back to, because I do think, the idea of there's kind of like the power of Square, right? And, like, e-commerce, all of this kind of plays into one aspect, right? Because, like, people are, think about the advertising that's all happening. Think about, all these kind of placements within media as well that also have to adhere to this mental health guide, right? You can't have something that's organic content and then slap on something that's, like, completely not aligned with what the messaging for that piece of content or video, what might have you. So, in your field, have you seen any, and this is externally, have you seen any innovations around mental wellness, and financial literacy, or just, in general, what have you been seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big things for us, and I think this is something that absolutely relates to mental wellness in a very big way, although not directly, approaching it, is really this concept of economic empowerment, right? I think very very core to what we do is providing the tools and services that that really allow anyone, entrepreneurs, to start a business, a restaurant, to continue running more efficiently and not shut down in the pandemic, a growing business to actually be able to grow successfully. Sometimes those can be the most stressful moments, is when your business is growing and you're just trying to hang on. And so, I think, the idea that that it's a platform that the little guys can use to compete with the big guys, to compete with the large, tech or whatever those companies may be. And through that process, what you really see is that, it's someone who's extremely passionate about food or about beauty or, whatever it may be. And they don't necessarily know how to run a business, right? And when you give someone the platform that lets them take that passion and turn it into a business, right? That the way that empowers them, right, is, that becomes, that success becomes everything, right? Because it's something they work really hard, but they love working on it. And then, that's what creates their future. That's what, that's what feeds the family. That's what, kind of empowers their lifestyle. And so I think, thinking about mental health, that's something over the last 10 years that's just been really important to me, is, how do we create a platform so that, people can go and create that future for themselves? And, and in the process of doing that, I think, again, there's so much involved in mental health there when you can empower people economically, right, to go and do that. On the flip side of that is, I think, people are, mentally stronger because they've achieved something, they're proud of themselves, but also it's something they're really engaged in.
Yeah. I mean, I think coming from the aspect of, it's hard because, when you're an entrepreneur or a small business, you do want to have the whole idea of work-life balance. I'm not really a huge fan of that term, just because I think it's just having balance at all in your life and being able to create boundaries. But at the same time, like, going back to, which will, kind of tease up a lot of the, the next topic, is fueling your mental fitness muscle, and I think the idea of this theme came from my initial conversation with David, because we were thinking, David was telling me about his journey in building Weebly, and, you just have to have, like, what's that fuel, right? And it's not when I say fuel, it's not what's the burnout, right? It's not like how much can you work then to burn out, right? Like that whole waking up 5 a.m. hustle, grind. Like, listen, if I can get my work done in 4 hours in a work week, like, let's go. Like it's like working smarter, not necessarily harder, but what's fueling you to be so efficient, right? So, I think that this kind of goes into before we go into the last question, but how can we frankly, I'm a solopreneur, but how can the larger population in corporate America, like, what can we be doing better from a either from a managerial to a leadership position to ensure that like our employees are fueling their mental fitness muscles and not necessarily burning out, right?
Yeah, I mean, I love I think the reason that work-life balance, that term, feels so outdated is because when we say work-life balance, we imagine like the old work-life balance from 20 years ago meant leaving at 5:01 p.m., right? And like leaving the office, and and it was very important that you weren't working past that. And I think that's not that's not super it doesn't resonate as much these days. And when I think about a more modern work-life balance, and this is something that I really try to stress with the team, is like, don't feel bad about taking time for yourself during the day, because this is what it is. First of all, we all of us don't have commutes anymore, and too often I feel people just giving all that time back to the employer, which is like which I think it's fair to split it. So a lot of times I emphasize, it's like, okay, well, you're working from home, that's the reality. I think what fuels poor work-life balance is when a meeting comes up and you're like, wait, I was supposed to go to my kid's soccer game at 3 p.m. or whatever it is in your life that you were like really looking forward to, that was really important to you. And then you say no to that in your personal life, right? To say yes to something in work that's just not as important. And so I think, to me, that's what I really try to emphasize, is draw those boundaries, because and it's okay to say, at the beginning of the pandemic, I would take 30 minutes every single day from 10 to 10:30 to come inside, and, I was teaching my kid to read. And and it's like, there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah, it's in the middle of the workday, but I scheduled that out. That was like completely blocked time. Nothing was going in that time. And then and that was fantastic for my work-life balance, because I could kind of integrate different elements throughout the day. So I think it's really important to just to your point, like, get your work done, right? And if you're getting your work done, then there's no guilt in saying like, hey, I'm going to take lunch with my family. I'm going to go do a walk at 2 p.m., like whatever it is, like, get that time in, because, we have that flexibility now. And it's not just all work. It's like you get your work done and then you do the things that are important to you, and make sure that you're doing both.
I love that. I would agree with that, David. How about you, Meredith?
Yeah, I think something really important that David is hitting on is just this idea that mental health care and taking care of yourself is not one size fits all. Not everyone has the same needs, and your needs could also change day to day. So I think when talking about what companies can do to support their employees, it's less about, enforcing a particular policy than it is creating a culture of mental health across all of those interactions, whether that's checking in with a colleague to see how they're feeling on a regular basis and responding to that appropriately, to normalizing the idea of taking a mental health day or just taking a day for yourself because it's what you need in that moment. And taking care of your mental health should be viewed as a sign of strength and something that's ultimately going to benefit the organization rather than a sign of weakness. And I think that is a cultural shift that still needs to happen in terms of people's mindset and also how they interact with one another in the workplace.
Completely agree with that, Meredith. And I think I think the flipping of it, it's a strength and not necessarily a weakness. This whole thing of, I have a couple of clients that, where it's like, okay, just left my desk. Now I came back. And I think, well, some of that is good because you kind of need to know. At the same time, it's like, do you need to know? Like, how much information is too much information? It's like, we don't like, and I remember I was talking to a friend of mine, and he's just like, there's all these meetings just getting piled on. And he literally just put from 12 to 1 busy, where it's like, he just got lunch and no one else came into that time. And, you shouldn't feel guilty about that. We're humans, like, we're human beings. And I think I'm looking forward to that shift. And I'm hoping that, that will just continue to evolve, because I do think that's going to make a it's going to make a more productive workforce either or. So, that's going to be beneficial for both the employer and the employee, in my opinion. But on a more personal note, what does mental fitness mean to you at this point in your lives? And then how do you fuel your mental fitness muscle? David, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think, it's a good question. I think that, for me, what does mental fitness mean? I mean, what's important to me, and I'll be honest, I don't always remember to do this, but, it's checking in with yourself in terms of like, how am I feeling right now? Because sometimes you can be running at 1,000,000 miles an hour, kind of on autopilot, and then, and then not be mindful of, kind of what's going on with yourself, emotionally, and so I think for me, it's just, it's trying to have that, trying to be mindful, trying to have that awareness of like, where am I, kind of like that self check-in, and make sure that I plan things to kind of, I want to say be kind to myself in the sense of, I learned, probably a little bit too late, that like, I'm not a robot, and, and I need to plan my schedule realistically. Like, I'm a person, right? Like, I'm a human being. And so it's not going to work for me if I schedule a meeting where, maybe I have to have a really challenging conversation with someone, right? And then like literally the next meeting is going into an all hands in front of the whole company, right? Like, that just doesn't work because I come out of that meeting and I'm feeling a certain way, and I just can't do that, right? Like, I can't bridge that gap. I'm going to need, some buffer in between, right? So I think, for me, it's really about understanding, how am I going to manage my emotional state throughout the day actively, right? So, and it turns out, like, yes, you can plan your schedule for your emotional state. Like, you can predict that after this meeting, I'm just going to feel kind of blah. I'm going to like, I'm going to be kind of in a knot, and it's going to take me an hour to like, kind of like cool down from that. Right. And so, I think for me, it's just trying to be aware of, kind of trying to predict where I'm going to be, and then not planning an impossible schedule, to say like, hey, this would be impossible for anyone to do. Right. Like, let's plan things so that, A, I'm aware of where I am, B, I try to predict it, and I try to plan a schedule that actually works for me as a person, right? Not just me as like this work robot.
I agree with that. And also, to your point, David, real quick before Meredith chimes in, is I think knowing, like, rather than, for me sometimes, which I've gotten better at, is not canceling last minute, but like being able to predict like where I'm going to be in that moment. Like, whoa, looking at my schedule the day before, I'm like, that's aggressive, Jen. Like, let's scale that back. Like, I didn't even have a bio break in that one, right? That's what we do these days, in the pandemic. That's what you have to say, bio break. What is that? But anyways, like, it's like making sure that your schedule is not packed, so you don't burn out like on a Monday and you can't work the rest of the week, which I've done so many times because people just like, so I think that's such a really good point, David.
Yeah, similarly, I think for me, this idea of mental fitness is less about, one specific action I'm taking to support myself, and more about recognizing that I'm not going to be at 100% every day. And that's okay. The same way our physical health might fluctuate on a day-to-day basis, the way we feel does as well. And sometimes there's not an explanation for it as well. And so I think just what David referenced about checking in with yourself and being really honest about like what your limitations and needs might be in any given moment is very, very important, because it's not always the easiest thing to predict, as much as we may try to do that. So I think it's more about that constant kind of checking in and pivoting as needed, based on what you're feeling at any particular moment.
Agreed. And I think, taking to that point of, I think it's boundaries have been my favorite word in the pandemic, which I didn't even know what that word was until the pandemic hit, and understanding like, saying no, like, it just because just because you could be your boss or your manager, be like, listen, like this is the 3 p.m. If it's a diehard meeting, but if it's just a meeting that like, I'm 1 out of 10 and you can send me notes sort of thing, like creating those boundaries and being able to say no. Because in the end, I really truly think that people respect you 10 times more when you say no and not yes all the time, because you're respecting yourself and your time and your headspace. So I think that's really important. So I wanted to also just ask, is there anything, as we're kind of wrapping up, is there anything that you would love to leave with the audience before we ended our interview today?
No, I mean, I think it's been a great conversation. I think, it's important for people to remember that even, anyone in any position, one of the hardest things for me as Weebly was growing and sort of being an entrepreneur and kind of being in that high pressure, high stress environment, was really learning to manage my own emotional state throughout the day, throughout the week, right? And so I don't think, I think you might think it sounds silly at first blush to say, oh wow, I need to think about my emotions at work, right? Like I need a plan for them. Some of these things are entirely predictable as far as how you're going to feel and where you're going to be, but I think that when you think about even, the highest performing athletes, right? Like they're doing the same thing. They're thinking about their emotional state and they're planning for it and they're working around it to recognize that they're a person, right? They're not a machine. And so I think that's really important. And it's just important to understand that like the highest performers, in any area are doing the same thing. And that's how you can get high performance, right? Is recognizing you're not a machine, you're a person. So like, how do I proactively plan for that? And it's really important. And the more you can learn to plan for and manage your own emotional state, like the more you actually show up and perform at work, right? So I think that that last conversation we're having is really important, and really something to recognize.
Yep, I would agree with that. Also, just to note on that, I mean, there's a lot of stuff coming out now around mental health and athletes. I mean, I was talking to one hockey player, female hockey player up in Canada, and she's probably 22 years old, I think maybe 21. The amount of how much she knew herself, like, and the language she was using, I was like, wow, they really did the work much earlier because they had to do the work. And to really know themselves. So I think that's an interesting reference, David. Well, I just want to thank you both so much for joining us today. Hopefully, you'll continue to be involved in the Pivotal Moments community. And thank you to our listeners as always. We have David Rusenko. He is the former founder of Weebly that was acquired by Square, and now he's the GM of e-commerce at Square Inc. And thank you for your service to help me with my finances, Square. That is not an ad, just a pure thank you. And we also have Meredith Goldberg-Morse. She is she's a senior manager of social impact at Viacom, CBS, and particularly with MTV. Let's go, MTV. Used to love you, still love you guys, but watch all your music videos back in the day. And I just want to say thank you both so much for joining us. Thank you for tuning into another episode of We Are Everyone. You can subscribe to We Are Everyone on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, and also be sure to visit www.pivotalmoments.org to learn more about the organization. And we also want to hear what mental wellness means to you. So you can follow us on social media, submit your video, and we will catch you next time. Thank you so much.